There's a new member of the Hall of Fame, just one. There's some other names that could have been in and didn't get the support. Plus, the Seattle Mariners are going to try to build upon two successful seasons, one of which sent them to a thrilling postseason, albeit one that ended a little too quickly for them, but at least it was a postseason. And you know who's really thrilled about that? Dane Gonzalez, the host of Locked On Mariners. He's the guest on today's episode of Locked On MLB.
You are Locked On MLB, your daily MLB podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, baseball fans, and welcome to Locked On MLB, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. This is the daily podcast. We talk about all of Major League Baseball. I am your host, Paul Francis Sullivan. If you don't believe me, there's my lower third. You can call me Sully. Today's episode is brought to you by our new friends over at FanDuel Sportsbook. Easy for you to say. It's the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/Locked On today to get started. I am an Emmy-nominated television producer who sometimes has trouble getting a sentence out. I have been a podcaster for well over a decade right now, and I'm beginning my fifth season as a host here at the Locked On Podcast Network. Follow us at Locked On MLB Pods on Twitter and on Instagram. And I'm your pal Sully. I'm on Sully Baseball on Twitter, Sully Baseball Podcast on Instagram. And be sure to tell your smart device to play podcast Locked On MLB, or check out some of the other great shows on the Locked On Podcast Network, including, just taking one totally at random right now, Locked On Mariners, whose host, or one of the hosts, that's Dane Gonzalez. Welcome back to the show, buddy.
Hey, thanks, Sully. Yes, totally random. Totally, right
out of the hat.
Showed up. I just decided to, just come in, say hello, and all of a sudden I'm on the show. Boom.
Well, look at those of you who've been following the show, and I know I have, know that I've been bringing on the hosts of each and every one of the Locked On podcast shows. Millard Thomas of Locked On Diamondbacks is doing his weekly show tomorrow, and Ruth Capulis, who is not a Locked On host, but is a huge Blue Jays fan and expert, is going to be coming in, because right now we don't have a host for Locked On Blue Jays. We're looking for one. If you are a Blue Jays fan, or if you are former Blue Jay Pat Tabler, be sure to contact us here at the Locked On Podcast Network. Love to have you on there. I don't know why I picked Pat Tabler. He was part of the 1992 World Series champion. Hey, we're going to talk a lot about home runs, Cal Raleigh, big rallies, the big rallies against the Blue Jays, and a couple of frustrating losses, but, certainly a year that Mariners fans will never forget. But a big event happened on the afternoon, which is the 24th of January, 2023. Scott Rolen can look his children in the eye and say, I am a Hall of Famer. And Todd Helton can wander around wondering who the 11 or 12 who didn't vote for him that kept him out of the Hall of Fame. And Billy Wagner might be wondering the same damn thing too. What are your thoughts about, first of all, Rolen in the Hall of Fame, Helton barely missing, and the cases for Wagner and Jones becoming more and more interesting?
Yeah, so I think this is well deserved for Scott Rolen. He was worth nearly 70 WAR by Fangraphs metrics. I mean, a 281, 364, 490 hitter with a 122 career WRC plus, and he was a great defender on top of that. Won some rings, all that good stuff. So I think this was more than deserved. Helton missing by 11 votes is absolutely brutal. I think he's on a good pace to at least make it here pretty soon, considering the ground that he made up this year. So that's great. Jones and Wagner, they've made some progress here as well, and I think they'll make a pretty strong push next year. The one guy that I'm a little upset didn't get more support this time around was Jeff Kent, and Kent's now off of the ballot. I think he only got about 46% of the vote.
That's right.
What are we doing here, man? Jeff Kent was a great player. That's a guy that I grew up watching, and I feel that 46%, even if you don't think he's a Hall of Famer, I think he should be getting more than 46% of the vote here. So I think that's quite a shame on that front. But yeah.
I think one of the things that we saw this year, obviously, there's a couple of elephants in the room that we'll address shortly, but
Mm,
um, there weren't a lot of great choices as the first time ballots. Certainly no locks. I think that helped Helton. I think that helped Billy Wagner because it allowed people to make their cases. Clearly, that helped Rolen a great deal.
mm,
I'm glad Rolen is in. I've supported his Hall of Fame candidacy. I understand, there's some players are surefire locks, and some people need argument and debate. I think that's what got Burt Blyleven eventually in the Hall of Fame. And without doing by the veteran committee, I mean, there's something always weird about the veteran committee ones because a lot of times there's someone, obviously, and again, I feel guilty saying this because he was a wonderful player and a wonderful baseball guy. It's just everyone will always point to Harold Baines' inclusion as a moment of maybe a little overreach of the committee. Again, I Baines had a wonderful career and was a solid player and a good baseball man and not someone it's so it kind of is upsetting that he's kind of put on in kind of a negative light, but you sort of see Baines is in the Hall of Fame and some other people aren't is I don't know, I think a little bananas, but
mm,
um I'm glad Helton is getting his turn in, that he'll probably get his turn in next time. And I think Billy
yeah,
Wagner, who I think is one of the great relievers of all time,
agreed. Yeah,
Wagner, it's funny. Sometimes people don't get into the Hall of Fame based upon something that they have no control over. I had said
right.
for years, Jim Rice took 15 attempts to get into the Hall of Fame, and I am absolutely convinced that if Mookie Wilson swung and missed at one of the pitches thrown by Bob Stanley and the Red Sox won the '86 World Series, I'm convinced Jim Rice would have been on the first ballot
Mm,
because they would have said Williams was the best all-around player, Yastrzemski had the longevity, but they won with Rice. And that would have been the narrative, and he would have been in instantly. And
mm,
I do believe that if one of the people on this ballot, Carlos Beltran, if he swung at an Adam Wainwright pitch and hit like a game-winning double, and the Mets went on to win the 2006 World Series, I believe Billy Wagner would be in the Hall of Fame right now
mm,
because there almost is an unwritten rule, save for Lee Smith, that you have to have clinched be a closer on a World Series winner in order to get in. I mean, Trevor Hoffman and Lee Smith are exceptions, of course, but when you
yeah,
think about every other big reliever, the only exception is Hoyt Wilhelm didn't clinch the '54 series, but he was part of a World Series winner. Gossage, Eckersley, Raleigh Fingers, Mariano Rivera, all these ones, the late Bruce Sutter, may rest in peace. All these ones had the image of them jumping up, clinching a World Series title. Because Billy Wagner doesn't have that, it sounds weird. It sounds totally irrelevant. And yet, I think it plays into a factor of thinking of him as a Hall of Famer,
sure.
because if he had won and we had the image of him jumping up, then people would have seen his stats, which compare very favorably to someone like Trevor Hoffman. He would have been in like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's, there goes, whether we want to admit it or not, there's a lot more that goes into it than just the numbers,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's the memories, it's the moments, it's the big moments, it's the rings, right? Talking about Scott Rolen, he won, going back to him, he won a ring in 2006, and that probably changed everything for him because Scott Rolen was never, when he was active, he was never a guy that everyone looked to and said that's a star, right? You're naming your top 5, top 10 players in the game at that time. No one's saying
Yeah.
Scott Rolen, but he's quietly, I mean, you heard the war that I listed there. Quietly
Yeah.
one of the best players, so of his era. And so, but because he got that ring, I think that kind of helps garner more attention there. And so same thing with, I think especially with a reliever even more so because relievers are kind of like the kickers of baseball, right?
Yeah.
no one really thinks about them. No one really talks about them, but they're so crucial to the game at the end of the day. And someone like Billy Wagner should be an absolute no-brainer, but because no one really cares about relievers, you have to have that iconic moment, right? You have to do something that transcends the position, right? And so, yeah, so I get what you're saying there on that, for sure.
And that Met team, I absolutely believe would have clobbered the Detroit Tigers in that World Series. And it was just that Cardinal team. It's funny, the '06 ring may have gotten Rolen into the Hall of Fame and kept Billy Wagner out of the Hall of Fame. It's an interesting sort of way to take a look at it. Alex Rodriguez and Manny Ramirez get about 33% of the vote. I understand the PED situation, and I don't, because Ortiz is in there. All right. We know Pudge Rodriguez did a bunch of stuff. Look at, I know I'm not supposed to say this. Jeff Bagwell's the most obvious user I've ever seen in my life, more so than anybody else. And he went from his scouting report being he's too skinny, doesn't have enough power, to being a Hall of Fame slugger after becoming friends with Ken Caminiti. And I think Bagwell belongs in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
I just think that we've taken the PED subject off the table. And as I've said, this is less about the morality of PEDs and more about who do you like. People like David Ortiz. They didn't like Alex Rodriguez. People liked Pudge Rodriguez. People didn't like Manny Ramirez. It becomes who you like rather than anything to do with the validity of a PED argument. And whether you like Alex Rodriguez or not, and whether he did PEDs or not, he's one of the best third basemen and one of the best shortstops in baseball history.
Yeah. And I mean, and I'm personally not a purist when it comes to this stuff at all. I think all these guys should be in the Hall because you can't tell the story of baseball without these guys. And I think that's ultimately what the Hall's purpose should be, is to tell the full story of baseball, of professional baseball in America and beyond even. And so, yeah, I think this is a shame, and I do agree that it is a little bit of a popularity contest, especially with some of the older writers who covered these guys back in the day and are more so baseball purists, essentially, gatekeepers, quite frankly. And so this and we've seen this lessen a little bit as newer writers are starting to come in and become eligible to vote in this thing, but it's still not enough at this point. Hopefully we see quite a bit of change here as these guys get further and further along in the ballot, and hopefully some of these guys get in and we don't have another Clemens Bond situation.
I told you what my Bond solution was over the years. Bonds just keep taking an at-bat every year and pushing his Hall of Fame eligibility further down the line. And there were times where, can you imagine him coming up now as a pinch hitter? He wouldn't be a valuable DH for a team. Are you kidding me? Now, absolutely. I saw who the Giants were putting out in left field for a bunch of the times over the last few years. Try and tell me what a 50-something-year-old Bonds isn't a step up? Come on, give me a break. Next year, by the way, we do have an absolute no-brainer first ballot, which is Adrian Beltre. There's no argument against, not one valid, not traditional, not anything else. By the
Mariners legend, of course. By the
way, by the way, if Nelson Cruz just timed his leap a little better, he'd have that World Series ring too. But you're going to have Joe Mauer and Chase Utley are going to be on the ballot for the first time. Those are going to be some interesting debates. Jose Bautista, Bartolo Colon, Adrian Gonzalez, Matt Holliday, Jose Reyes, please, Victor Martinez, and David Wright are all going to be on the ballot for the first time. I think this helps. I think Beltre's in, and I think this will help. Wagner and Helton. I think they'll have another year to gestate, and I think those are going to be our three next year: Beltre, Helton, and Billy Wagner, and that'd be a fun class.
Sounds pretty good.
And look I don't know that for sure, but I just think that is if I were a betting man, That's what I'd be betting. And by the way, if you're a betting person, do you know where you go to? May not be where you think I'm going to say. We're going to FanDuel. FanDuel is our new sports betting partner for Locked On because they're the #1 sports book in America. FanDuel. If you're new to FanDuel, that's even better because they have so many great features to make betting on sports fun and easy. We got a big old weekend with the conference championships, which I'm not even a football fan, but this is my personal favorite weekend for football, where you get to see which two teams will make it to the Super Bowl. Will it be Kansas City? Will it be Cincinnati? Will it be San Francisco? Will it be Philadelphia? The only thing we do know is it won't be Buffalo. So we can tell you that new customers can join today and get started with $150 in free bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Just sign up at FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel has your favorite bets from the money line to point spread to player props. Plus, you can even combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with same game parlay. All on an app that's safe, secure, super easy to use, and fits in the palm of your hand. So football fans, don't miss out. Place your first $5 bet to get 150 clams in free bets, win or lose, at FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, we're here with Ty Dane Gonzalez. There was already a Ty Gonzalez in SAG, so that's why you had to go by Ty Dane Gonzalez.
Yeah, exactly.
You're the host of Locked On Mariners, and for the first time since Ichiro's rookie year,
yeah,
there were October games, and a couple of them were real thrillers, and a couple of real thrillers didn't end particularly well for the Mariners. But you had a Cal Raleigh home run to hit you into the playoffs. You had a one of the most mind-boggling comebacks I've seen in a long time to eliminate the Toronto Blue Jays. And even though the series with Houston only lasted 3 games, 2 of them were absolute thrillers, and one of them was, I have no evidence that it's over. Tell us a little bit about, especially after the 2021 season that ended with 90 wins, but just narrowly missing the postseason. How did this year feel for a Mariner fan?
Well, it was pretty scary at first because they started off horrible. They were like 29-36 at one point, and all the hope and optimism that you went into the year with was essentially drained. And it felt like they had taken a huge step back. And, you know, some of that also was injuries. You know, they were decimated by injuries, particularly on the position player front, which is funny because they were actually remarkably healthy in the rotation. They didn't sustain a legitimate injury there at all the whole year. But yeah, once they turned things around, I mean, quite frankly, it felt like something that not a lot of us have experienced before, right? Because we haven't. Right. That's just what it is. And especially in a very long time. And so it felt a little bit like a dream in a way. And you didn't really recognize or realize what had happened until it was over, especially those last couple weeks, because you have the drought ender with the Raleigh home run, and there's obviously all the emotions of that and the drought finally coming to an end. And then you go to Toronto, you win the first game, which, I mean, I was there in the building. I was at Rogers Center. I live in Toronto, so I went to both games. And seeing the Mariners in the playoffs, first of all, was just mind-blowing in itself. Second of all, to beat a really good team like the Blue Jays in that stadium with that environment was mind-blowing in itself as well. And then to experience that comeback, the 10-9 win, where you know you're down 8-2 or 9-2.
It was like 8. It was like 8-1 at one point. It was ridiculous.
They destroyed Robbie Ray and his homecoming. They're all chanting Robbie, Robbie. I thought it was over. Right, there, people next to me are already buying tickets for Game 3. Like, all this stuff is going on. It seems like it's over. And then they just keep on chipping away, and they keep on chipping away. Because the thing that I learned this year, or really the thing that we should have learned in 2021, is that whenever this iteration of the Mariners play, things are going to get weird.
Yeah.
Without a doubt. Things are going to get weird. And so, yeah.
Yeah,
It showed their resiliency. It showed their resiliency, and they showed that again in the ALDS as well.
I got to tell you that I was at my high school reunion homecoming football game, and I was hanging around with two friends of mine from high school, and one of whom I'll just say is someone who I don't see eye to eye with on a lot of political and social things,
Sure.
but we are both big baseball fans. And it was wonderful. And to be fair, I hadn't seen him in a while. We didn't talk about politics. It was like great to see you, my old buddy, and everything like that. And we said, okay, we won't bring up MAGA or anything like that. And we're at a high school football game. I don't know any of the kids. I'm a 50-year-old man. What am I going to be saying? Oh boy, I hope we win. I mean, how pathetic is that at some point? But we were talking and everything, and I looked down and said it's 8-1. And I'm like, or whatever the score was. I'm like, okay. And I really wanted the Mariners to win. But I remember thinking, all right, well, at least I don't have to pay attention to that game. And I looked down, it's 8-4. Now, my buddy, who I said is a rabid baseball fan. And eventually, because on my phone I couldn't get the TV, but I could get the play-by-play from the app, the two of us were at a picnic table staring at my phone while the rally, listening to the game while the rally was going on, not paying a lick of attention. There could have been a dragon on the field. We would not have noticed. And when they were coming back, you would have thought that we both grew up in Tacoma, because we were so into the Mariners coming back, because it was just so thrilling. Yeah. And then when they finally took the lead, we kind of looked at each other, because there was a sense a little bit of, for a minute, it was like, well, at least they're making a game of it. At least they're making a game of it. They're showing some guts. And when they took the lead, we were like, what?
Yeah,
what?
I'll tell you the most awkward experience and most conflicting experience of my baseball, or my life as a baseball fan, happened when they tied the game on the bloop shot from J.P. Crawford.
Right.
Bo Bichette and George Springer both got hurt on that play, and you could hear a pin drop. And I was so excited because they tied the game, but also in that moment, I'm in enemy territory, and two of their star players are down on the field right now.
Yeah,
I can't do anything. Like my body froze up. I had no idea what to do in that moment.
So what did you do? Come on, what did you do?
I sat there and I looked around and I was like, yeah, man, that really sucks that happened. Yeah, I hope they're okay. Yeah. But in my mind, I'm like, oh my God, we just tied it. Oh my God. Yes. And then obviously the Adam Frazier double after that, big pop, of course, because and then it just, and then, going back to that game as a whole, like, the thing that I found the most impressive was it's 10-9, and they put in a rookie George Kirby, who's never pitched out of the bullpen. To close that game out, and he just shuts it down, and then goes into Game 3 of the ALDS, the first playoff game in Seattle in 20 years, and shuts down the Astros.
And oh man, and they pitched, so the pitching staff was so amazing in that game. Yeah. Unbelievable. And it was really only one bad, the one home run to Pena and the home run to Alvarez in the opening game. But they showed up. They really showed up to the team that went on to win the World Series. And you go into this year knowing that I guess in some way it's like, okay, they had an excellent 2021, which probably saved Service's career as a manager. They overcame that. I was calling for Service's head. Full disclosure, when they got off to the rancid start, I am a believer of, hey, and we saw it happen certainly with Philadelphia this year, that sometimes they're like, hey, if it's not working, don't wait for the end of the year. If it's not working, make a change.
Yeah, the problem with that is Scott Service and Jerry Dipoto are a package deal. I can't envision a world where one of them stays and the other is gone. And
as it turned out all right, because they wound up turning the corner. They had a remarkably effective second half, and and with this, what you hope with the Mariners, and we're going to talk about this in the final segment, you hope with the Mariners is they're building upon each year. That the improvement that led to 2021 led to breaking through into the playoffs, of the sort of the psychological leap that took. And then now we're going to go into the final season of this time and hopefully see, if you're a Mariners fan, see what's happening. By the way, thanks so much for making Locked On MLB your first listen every day. Your second listen, obviously have that be Locked On Mariners. But then go to Locked On MLB Prospects. Host Lindsey Crosby is a prospect encyclopedia, and he's going deep on the MLB stars of tomorrow. It's free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Final segment here with Dane Gonzalez. The Blue Jays and the Mariners are tied together in history, that they both came into the league in 1977. They were tied together in last year's postseason with the thrilling 2-game wild card series, and they're tied together with one of the blockbuster deals of the winter in the Teoscar Hernandez trade. Tomorrow we're going to be with Ruth Capulis, who's a huge Blue Jays mind. I'm going to be talking about why they needed to make that deal. I think we all saw they had bullpen problems.
Yep.
Gee whiz, why would I say that?
Yeah.
But let's go into, and so they Mariners sacrificed some bullpen depth in that deal. But I think bringing Teoscar Hernandez to that lineup is no small addition.
Oh, it's a game changer for the Mariners, and there is no understating that. This is an incredible move for the Mariners, and one that a lot of fans feel is a lateral move, which blows my mind.
No.
Teoscar Hernandez, after he returned from his injury, was essentially Julio Rodriguez at the plate. And that was from May 7th onward, I believe, this past year. And overall, the numbers, kind of a down year for him. The last 2 years before that, he was essentially a borderline MVP candidate. Like, this is a massive upgrade for the Mariners. One, just from a health standpoint, because Mitch Haniger, unfortunately, hasn't been able to stay healthy. And two, from just an overall offensive upgrade standpoint, right? Like, this is what Teoscar brings to you, upside-wise, ceiling-wise, is a second Julio Rodriguez.
Right. And I'm glad you made that point, because it's almost as if the Mariners bought low. Even though they did sacrifice some quality arms, Teoscar Hernandez was a legit all-star for the last few years. And you're right, he had a bad first half of the season that sort of sullied, if you'll excuse the expression, the overall stats. If he has even a mild bounce back, you know, maybe not to MVP level, potential, borderline MVP level, but legit all-star, you're going to plug that into the lineup, and the effect that's going to have, the ripple effect that's going to have on the rest of the lineup. This is a critical move. We all know the Astros, they're the defending champs, back-to-back pennant winners, won the World Series. They just added Jose Abreu. So, they lost Justin Verlander, but they went to the World Series without Verlander a couple of years ago, and their pitching depth is off the charts. We all know that. But to stay playing alongside, you almost don't look at the Astros. The Mariners are better than anybody in the Central. And so you're really playing alongside the Blue Jays. They're the Blue Jays again, the Yankees, the Rays, and to say, we got to keep up with that group. Because that'll punch your card for October. And maybe if the Astros take a step back, you take advantage of it. But the overall, you had to keep up with them, and you had to keep up making sure that you get that extra boost. And I think that one of the worst things you could do, especially if you have a comeback season like they just had, is to be stagnant, which is what I think Baltimore is doing right now. When they had that great turnaround, I don't see them making a big move. This was a big move for a legit all-star who was there for the taking.
Yeah, and this was a guy that I had talked about a couple weeks before the deal actually happened, because you look at Toronto, you look at where Toronto is at. Toronto needs to get more defensively inclined, or at least before this offseason, they needed to get more defensively inclined, and they needed to add to their bullpen. And so I saw an opportunity there with the Mariners where they have a lot of depth in that bullpen. And they also had a couple of starters that they might be willing to move. And, Teoscar only had the 1 year left on his deal. So it made sense for the two sides to line up. And sure enough, it happened. Going back to your comment about them being stagnant, there's a massive conversation going on in the fan base where a good portion of the Mariners fan base thinks that the Mariners haven't done enough. And I somewhat agree, because Teoscar Hernandez isn't costing them a ton of money. He's making pennies on the dollar for how good for relative to how good he is. I think he's owed about $14.5 million in arbitration. That's nothing nowadays. They essentially swapped money with the Brewers in the Colton Wong deal.
Yeah.
By trading Jesse Winker and Abraham Toro. So that was essentially a wash in terms of payroll. After that, they added AJ Pollock on a 1 year, $8 million deal. And I think that's an interesting flyer for them to take. And I think that he's going to be pretty significantly better than he was in Chicago, because Chicago was a mess last year. But it felt like they could do more because they should have the payroll flexibility to do more. Now, I'm not saying that they should have gone out and signed Justin Verlander and Aaron Judge and all that stuff, but a lot of people were focused on that big shortstop market, the Xander Bogaerts of the world, the Dansby Swansons, the Carlos Correas. They weren't involved in that. And I think you look at the contracts that those guys signed, the ridiculous amounts of money and year commitments that were being made to some of those guys, even Correa before all that mess happened. You kind of understand that, but then there's that mid-market, right? The 4 year, $60 million type of guys, and they just avoided that. Mm-hmm. And they haven't done anything else. And you look at this roster, they have the DH open, which a lot of teams prefer, of course. But to me, there aren't enough good hitters on their roster right now to justify having the DH open. And They were reportedly interested in Michael Brantley, Brandon Belt. They didn't get that done, though. Mm-hmm. And left field is also another question mark right now, because they have Jared right now. Jared Kelenic and AJ Pollock are set to platoon with one another, and Kelenic should be better when he's just getting more opportunities against righties instead of lefties, and that should boost the overall numbers a little bit. But that's still a major concern. So there's still holes on this roster, I think, and so I feel like they could have done more to improve. But overall, one thing they're looking at a full season of Luis Castillo as an addition as well. They're looking at a full year of George Kirby as an addition. They're looking at, a full year of a revitalized Cal Raleigh, the return of Tom Murphy as their backup catcher. They're going to have one of the best catching positions in all of baseball with Cal Raleigh and Tom Murphy, as long as Murphy is healthy. So, they do have these things that are coming over from last year into this year that they view as additions. But I still think that with the opportunity at hand, coming off of the big year that they did, that they could have done more. But I think at the end of the day, they're much better than they were last opening day. And so talking about, closing that gap with the Astros, I think they have done that. And they're in a position where I think they're really just 115, 120 WRC plus bat away from legitimately contending for that division. And, some would argue that they should have done that this offseason, but I still think they're in a good position to do that and to make that happen.
Is there anyone available still? I mean,
the big one is Brian Reynolds, right? Brian Reynolds, the Pirates outfielder, who he's requested a trade. The Pirates are reportedly lowballing him. The Mariners have long been interested in him. This has been an ongoing thing for the last couple of years. They checked in on Reynolds back in 2020, I believe. Yeah. They really, really like him. They really want him, and the Mariners are known to circle back on guys. Hence Colton Wong, hence Tommy La Stella, right? They were interested in those guys back in 2020 as well, and now all of a sudden they're Mariners. Obviously, that's on a much smaller scale. But, the thing with Reynolds, right, is are the Pirates going to be realistic about what they want for him? Because he still has 3 years of club control, and he's really affordable. And even though that they're incredibly cheap, they still hold the leverage here on Reynolds. And the Mariners, their farm system isn't what it once was. Now that they've traded for guys like Luis Castillo and Teoscar Hernandez. Well, not really Teoscar, but... they've traded for some guys and they've depleted that farm system, and guys have graduated, right? Which is a good thing at the end of the day. But do the Mariners actually have the ammo to go out and get a Brian Reynolds? That's the question as well. So, but I do look at some other potential trade targets, like a Max Kepler with the Twins. Mm-hmm. I see that as a fit for them. It-
Is Max Kepler going to be? I mean, are the Twins going to put him up? I mean, if the Twins have already put in the commitment for the likes of a Correa, would they be in a trading away position? Do you think?
well, they have like 9 billion outfielders on their roster right now, and they just acquired another one with Michael A. Taylor. And
Okay.
so, Kepler is a guy that has technically 2 years left of club control. I believe it's a player option at the end of this year. He hasn't really hit to the fullest of his potential. Really, he hasn't hit for much power as of late. He had one season where he hit like 34 bombs, and then after that, like he only hit 7 this past year. He's about an average to a slightly below average hitter. That's how he grades out. But simultaneously, he's also one of the best defensive outfielders in all of baseball. Quietly, like he was first in outs above average in right field this past year. So he's a really good defender. And I think there's a lot of potential in that bat. And I think because of the depth that the Twins have in the outfield, that he could be someone that is on the move here. But it would be for a major league piece. And I think this is another opportunity for the Mariners to maybe trade from a position of depth like their bullpen again. And, or maybe it's one of their starters that they have, because the Twins still need pitching. Maybe Chris Flexen, maybe Marco Gonzalez is someone of interest to them. And, you do the whole prospect thing and all that, and we see what happens. So I think there's an opportunity there for someone like Kepler, maybe Anthony Santander with the Orioles, who you mentioned, who don't seem like they're really interested in contending this year. They just kind of want to see how that, how their young guys develop and all that. Maybe Santander, who only has 2 years left of club control, makes some sense for them. But yeah, right now the word is that they're done. So,
Well,
I don't know.
Well, we'll see. And also keep in mind, everyone, the team that is playing in October is not necessarily the team that breaks camp in April. We
Exactly.
will see players that will be available. And every year, there's a team that has an obvious gigantic hole in it, that hole is filled internally, that people say, who would have thought that blank would have come up so big? And so I have trust in the Mariners that they're going to continue building upon this. And you know what, Ty? I hope we are going to be seeing another Northwestern. I know I'm showing some bias here, but I've always had a soft spot in my heart for the Mariners. I've not hidden that at all.
I know, yeah.
So,
Yeah.
well, Dane Gonzalez is the host of Locked On Mariners. Tell people where they can follow your show.
Yeah, you can check us out on YouTube 3 times a week right now until pitchers and catchers report. Then we're going back to 5 times a week. You can also find us on all your preferred podcast platforms, all of it. Think about it.
Right.
Think about the podcast platform. We're on there. Also, big news. We are scheduled to talk to Mariners President of Baseball Operations, Jerry DiPoto, on the show tomorrow. So that's going to be releasing tomorrow night, assuming that there's no schedule changes or anything like that. So look forward to that.
That's fantastic. Check that show out. Check us out at Locked On MLB Pods on Twitter and on Instagram. I'm your pal Sully. I'm at Sully Baseball on Twitter, Sully Baseball Podcast on Instagram. Thanks so much for making us your first listen. Once again, check out Locked On MLB Prospects, hosted by Lindsey Crosby, who's a prospect encyclopedia. He's going deep on the MLB stars of tomorrow. That show and our show and Ty's show are all available wherever you get your podcasts. Talking Hall of Fame, talking the Mariners of last year, the Mariners of this upcoming year, with Dane Gonzalez of Locked On Mariners. This has been Locked On MLB for the 24th day of January 2023. I'm your host, Paul Francis Sullivan. Please call me Sully.